Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to those of you who are showing up and here today. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you all on balance and boundaries. And I'm really happy that you decided to make the space today for this. My name is Josh Blatter. I am here on behalf of Peace on Purpose. And I am a facilitator and co-creator of many of the content that have been creating with Peace on Purpose. I am currently calling in from San Diego, California. So I'm on the earlier end of the time zone, but you recognize and know that you're all showing up from different places. Before we move into today's session on balance and boundaries, I would love for us to take a moment to practice together. And this practice is a practice that we call a moment to arrive. And what it is an opportunity for us to check in with how it is that we're showing up today. It allows us to transition into this space and redirect our attention and just create a little bit of a pause from our day to be a little bit more available and present to today's experience, today's conversations. So this practice can be done standing or it can be done seated. You could also do this practice lying down if you have the space to. And so take a moment to kind of decide or figure out how it is that you'd like to show up. For me, I think I'm going to stay seated and do whatever you need to do. Take whatever kind of movements to settle in and to make this kind of position feel just right, whether it's kind of rocking the hips side to side or maybe rolling out the shoulders a couple times, one direction, or turning the head, like orienting yourself to the room. And as you settle in, you can have your eyes open or closed, whatever allows you to feel most at ease. I'd say if your eyes are open, perhaps cast the gaze down below the screen. Might be a little bit more comfortable on the eyes and allow you to soften just a little bit more. And so as you find this position, whatever position feels supportive for you in this moment, notice how it is that your body is feeling. Notice if there's any areas in the body that might need a few extra moments of your attention and of your care and of your tending to. You might find it helpful to take a few deep breaths in and out through the nose or the mouth. Giving yourself the space as well to notice how your breath is showing up. How is your breath showing up? Like, do you notice your breath as being fast or slow, shallow or superficial? Do you notice if there's even like a temperature perhaps to the breath? Like, is it warm or cool? Taking a couple moments to greet each breath as they come. If you're just arriving, we're taking a moment of practice and of pause. So keeping your attention inward now, I invite you to observe your mind and how it's arriving. Oftentimes, our mind shows up a little bit later than our body does and our breath does. It likes to be oftentimes fashionably late, the mind. Sometimes lost in the past, reflecting on the future, anticipating, distracted. If you notice any of this, greet it, invite it in, don't push it away. Use this just as a moment to notice how your mind's showing up. Can you greet your mind with your attention in the same way in which you've greeted your body and your breath? Now, when you're ready to, if you're ready to, and invite your attention back to the body or onto your breath. Together, let's set an intention, perhaps for curiosity and learning and gratitude, even for everything that's allowed us to be in this space together, holding that collective energy and space. We'll breathe in together, inhale, and breathe out. In the next moment or two, if your eyes were closed, gently open them up. You can look around again and orient yourself to the room, remembering or reintegrating into the space. Right. Well, thank you for that practice and for presencing yourself with me and with each other together. So as part of the Peace and Purpose team, one of the things that we hold really near and dear to our hearts as we facilitate and bring mindfulness is that we stand true to some community agreements. And these community agreements are just ways in which we can invite in a space for learning, for dignity, for agency and choice, and for us to kind of feel collectively supportive and held. And these community agreements are that this space we dedicate to being a brave space. We invite in the invitation for compassion, to grow as we learn, to be brave. And community agreement is that everything that we do here and everything that we offer is a choice. Whether you participate in these practices or not is up to you. That we pride ourselves on community and not conformity. And that each of us as facilitators speak from our own authentic place and our own truth, but we embrace the truths and the differences of others. That we take space when space needs to be taken, and we make space when others need to be heard. Everything that we do is confidential. We invite in curiosity and openness, and most importantly, that we always tend to our own self-care. So if that means standing up, leaving the meeting, taking a sip of water, that we please listen to those things. So as I shared before, this conversation today that we're going to talk about is on balance and boundaries. And one thing that I want to say from the start is that I'm not here to define balance and boundaries for you. Instead, what I'm trying to do is support you in exploring them and how and when and where we experience them, and just some collective thoughts around their construct and ways to practice them. One thing that we'll say is that balance and boundaries are many things. One thing, though, is that they're dynamic, they're personal, they're complex, and they're vital. They're dynamic in the sense that balance and boundaries, they're always moving and taking on new shapes and adapting. They can look one way in one moment and another way in the next. And they're like balance and boundaries, they're living and breathing, kind of like we are. They're personal in the sense that they're unique to each of us. Balance and boundaries don't need to make sense to anyone but ourselves. I've had colleagues, for example, that can work 110 hours in a week and feel completely at balance and with boundaries expressed. That's not for everyone. It's personal and unique to each of us what these things look like. Balance and boundaries are complex. They're complex in that there are many variables that allow for or inhibit our ability to be in that state. Working in different cultures, social contexts, different systems, organizational structures, our upbringing, policies, all of this might make balance and boundaries difficult to maintain. This complexity piece is really important. One person can feel completely balanced when living in a state of chaos. Another person can feel out of balance even when there's stability around them. Someone can establish boundaries when they're in a boundaryless environment, and others can have difficulty creating boundaries even when they're invited. This is the complexity that surrounds balance and boundaries, and why these conversations are important. But more importantly, moreover, balance and boundaries, they're vital, and that we need balance and boundaries to offer us space to better serve ourselves, to do our work, to support those around us, to create healthy partnerships and friendships, relationships, and environments where collective well-being is a priority. And so balance and boundaries are skills that we can learn and that we can further refine. And that's what we're going to explore in this conversation. So like I said, that they're dynamic, they're personal, they're complex, and they're vital. So we'll begin our conversation looking a little bit more, kind of shining the spotlight on balance. We'll do a little practice. We'll look at boundaries, a little practice, and then we'll kind of wrap it all together. Oh, the relationship between balance and boundaries, which is interesting, a little practice, and then we'll wrap it up. Also, we'll have an opportunity at the end, a couple minutes for a question and answer at the very tail end. So if you have any questions, save them till then. So with all the complexity that surrounds balance and boundaries, like I said, they're difficult things to define. Instead of trying to define, starting with balance, what balance is, what I want you to do instead is take a moment to reflect on in your life a time when you felt balanced. Like, not trying to define the term, but can you reflect on a time in which you felt balanced? What did that look like, and what did that feel like? It could come to you as like a word or a short sentence or a place or a feeling that you felt in your body. You're more than welcome, if you'd like, to write that down. Or even share it in the chat if it's available to you to do so. Joanne shared like being underwater, very serene and calm. For me, it's up in the mountains. Like in the mountains, that's my place where you take a deep breath out. So reflecting upon and thinking about where and when, or moments when we felt balanced, can be very helpful in sort of connecting to that feeling that we're trying to seek out. Balance for some people can look like flexibility, resiliency, the capacity to navigate change. For some, balance is equated to rest, to being able to tend to our own health. These are just different ways in which we can think about it. Our capacity to adapt. Remember, like balance, like I said before, it's not a static state, but it's dynamic. It has like an ebb and flow to it. One way in which we can really admire this sort of dynamic ebb and flow that balance holds is by spending time observing it in nature. So like plants and animals and insects, they all demonstrate what this process of moving towards balance might look like. They have this innate understanding of harmony, a willingness to adapt. A plant, for example, it always grows towards the light, and if the light moves, then the plant moves directions. It's not lingering. It just pivots. Some animals migrate different seasons. Some animals hibernate when there's not an abundance of food. Some animals store it for the winter. As humans too, we have this ability and we have this capacity to really adapt and to find harmony and to find balance, but it's oftentimes kind of overlooked because of the speed at which we live our lives. get so caught up in moving and doing and trying to hold things into like a fixed structure that we neglect our own needs and our ability to self-regulate. So one possible way in which we can begin this process of coming into balance is by observing it, noticing it, however it is that we choose to define it. Because inevitably, there are symptoms in the body that we can connect to that are associated with that movement towards balance. And there's symptoms associated with the movement away from it. And this can be really helpful. So when we look at just from a straight nervous system perspective, talking about balance from a strictly nervous system perspective, it's when our body can self-regulate. Meaning when, like, our bodies have an accelerator and they have a brake. You've taken any biology classes, physiology classes, there's a sympathetic nervous system and there's a parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is how we move, how we take action, and our parasympathetic nervous system is how we slow down. And so when we're able to take action, whether it's getting out of bed or responding to a crisis situation, this is the accelerator, the sympathetic nervous system. And when we try to go to bed at night or digest food, we slow down. This is the parasympathetic state. And so when we're in balance, our body operates in a way in which it can speed up and slow down. Hope that makes sense. Kind of an oversimplified look at the nervous system. However, when we're out of balance, meaning our nervous system is dysregulated, we have a hard time sort of responding to situations. Like when we're out of balance, for example, it could be like simply sitting in traffic, and in your mind, it's like the world's going to end. Or the task of trying to fall asleep when you're out of balance might feel near impossible. Or waking up in the morning when we're out of balance, it's like, there's not enough coffee in the world that can get me out of bed in this moment. Like, this is all symptomatic of being out of balance. So noticing these things can be really helpful. In general, when we're out of balance and our nervous system is dysregulated, we tend to feel in the body more constriction. Tightness in the shoulders, tightness in the back. You might feel it in the hips, gripping in the stomach. But there tends to be a feeling of constriction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like physical constriction. It can also feel like mental constriction as well. Like there's just not enough space around me. Like I need space around me. I feel constricted. This is a symptom of imbalance. It can look like pain or discomfort. It can also look like the inability to eat or sleep, or if we find ourselves chronically sick, these are all kind of symptomatic of our state being slightly out of balance. Our breath tends to be a little bit shorter, a little bit shallower. Oftentimes it feels like we're breathing like up here in the chest. Our mind tends to be distracted more often. It moves towards negativity, pessimism, and fear. And consequently, we feel disconnected from others. Again, these aren't one-off incidents of feeling these things. This is when these have become chronic states that it might be indicative of ourselves and our state being out of balance. So we can notice these things and they can inform us about something. And on the contrary, we can see when we're imbalanced by observing the opposites. Like when we feel spacious and expansive, when the body's functioning really well, we're eating pretty well, we're sleeping decently, we're digesting well, eliminating well. Our breath feels a little bit lighter, easier, lower in the belly often. The mind's focusable, more positive, trusting, and we feel connected to others. So this is what we're looking for. Practices and techniques of ways of moving in this direction. So we can do this in many ways, and it's going to be unique to each of us. Practices like mindful movement, for example, conscious breathing, things like gratitude, oftentimes journaling, compassion-based practices, creating genuine connections with friends or colleagues, taking a moment to just slow down and pause, being in nature. Like there's so many different ways in which we can practice moving towards balance. And I think we each have our own repertoire of practices. It's just kind of remembering them in those moments when we feel out of balance and connecting to them. But, this is all predicated on our ability to connect with the feeling in the body when we're moving out of balance. Because that feeling is always going to precede the thought. So can we connect to the feeling? This is really what's vital. And so we're going to do a practice right now, sensing into balance in the body, in the breath, kind of in our overall nervous system. And so what we're going to do in this practice is use images as a tool to connect with the sensations in the body. We'll use images in this practice, but it doesn't have to be images. It can be sounds, or you can use tactile through touch or taste or smell. But what we're going to use is images in nature as a way to connect to possibly the feeling of moving towards a settled, centered, balanced place. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment. And essentially what we're going to do with each image is take 3 breaths with each image. And with each of those 3 breaths, I want you to just invite the image in. To just invite the image in. Notice how that image lands, in you. Do you feel a sense of expansion? Do you feel a sense of opening? Do you feel a sense of connection? Or do you feel a pushing away, a closing off, a blocking out? There's no right or wrong association with any of these images. Some are going to land better than others. They're all very neutral. So we'll move through those images together, taking 3 breaths with each, taking them all in. Noticing if that image moves you towards or away from that feeling or those feelings associated with balance. Pull the screen up now. Okay. All right. Oops, let me do full screen. Just seeing if I can do a slideshow. So it's one at a time. Here we go. All right, so take this image in on the screen. Just allow it to come in. Take 3 breaths. 3 breaths on your own. With each of those breaths, just allow the image to move through you. Notice how your body and your breath respond. Does it move you towards? Does it move you away from that feeling of openness, expansion? The next image on the screen again. Taking 3 breaths with this image, breathing it in, allowing it to move through you. And with those 3 breaths, just notice. Just notice. Three breaths. And 3 breaths, taking it all in. 3 breaths. And so now, the next image contains all of the images. If there's one that resonated more with you, if there's one image that moved you closer towards that feeling or those feelings associated with being in a state of balance, could you pick one? And then you find the image, if there is one, and if not, perhaps you can recall or call to mind some other image or place. I invite you to close the eyes and see if you could stay with that image and those feelings. And stay with that image and those feelings. Notice how that feels in you, within you. And take a deep breath in. And a deep breath out. And then if your eyes are closed, you can open them. And thank you for doing that little practice with me. So using nature, using nature as a tool. And I hope that you're able to connect with that feeling in some way. And so now, we're going to switch the conversation now a little bit. We're going to move from balance into the topic of boundaries. So Prentice Hemphill, who's the founder of the Embodiment Institute, defines boundaries as the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. I'll read that again. She defines boundaries as the distance in which you can love, at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Boundaries can be looked at as the space between us in which we're required to show up better, and the space around us that allows us to prioritize what's most important to us. In an environment where we have complete control over every variable, it would be much easier to be able to set such boundaries. However, when we're engaged in a world and interacting with others and we have priorities aside from our own, creating boundaries is much more challenging and much trickier. So with that in mind, it might be helpful to ask the question, how do we create space? How do we create boundaries when boundaries are not vastly recognized? And this is a question that I think all of us are constantly seeking answers to, and only we can solve that for ourselves. Because if you remember, balance and boundaries are personal, and they're unique to each of us. However, but setting boundaries, though, is an adaptable process. It requires a lot of things. First and foremost, it requires some level of self-awareness. Self-awareness to know our own boundaries and what's required for us to maintain them. It takes a keen sense of timing as well, especially when working with others. For example, like finding a neutral space, the right time of day, the right day of week, when neither us or the recipient are like activated or triggered, where there'll be compassionate listening. Trying to set boundaries at the wrong time when someone's triggered or agitated or stressed out might not derive the result we're looking for. Setting boundaries, it requires inclusive conversations built on honesty and respect and trust, and to hold space for ourselves as well as space for others to express their feelings, while keeping in mind that other people's boundaries could very well be quite different than our own. And all of this kind of diverse intersection of identity and diversity and culture might make this process really even more complex and at times pretty confusing. But the backbone of all of this is the ability, like I said, to listen compassionately and to seek out understanding. It's always supported by empathy and compassion, and the recognition that setting boundaries is an opportunity to enrich relationships. It's not something that compromises them. It doesn't jeopardize them. It's a process that allows us collectively to grow. So kind of to help understand what boundaries can look like, and the types of boundaries that we can adopt, it might be helpful to just kind of categorize them a little bit. And you could do a lot of different research and many different researchers have tried to like categorize boundaries in many different ways. But just to name like a few, like physical boundaries are one type of boundary, which is like, creating physical space around us that we need to feel that we can, tend to ourselves and others. Like literally the degree of physical space. Resource boundaries are kind of the boundaries that are kind of like time and energy. Like these resources that we have are limited. Understanding when we have the time, when we have the energy, when we have the resources to create the space that we need, and when we don't. Emotional boundaries, another type of boundary, like, allowing for different feelings to arise. Sometimes we need that space to feel fully happiness or sadness or frustration or confusion, agitation, allowing that space to feel deeply. It's another type of boundary. Mental boundary as well is another, which is for the most part like our ability to be open to different thoughts, values, opinions, beliefs, allowing others and ourselves to express them. These are different ways that boundaries can show up. So we have two things. So we have so far balance. What we looked at is essentially our ability to find that space of expansion and openness and connection. And we have boundaries, which is allowing the right space for us to love ourselves and others. So I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between balance and boundaries. So to some folks, balance might seem difficult to achieve without boundaries. Meaning, like, how can I like get to that space of self-care when my boundaries feel infringed upon? It's like not possible. To others, boundaries might not exist without achieving balance first. Meaning, like, how can I have the mental strength and the fortitude and the energy to set boundaries when I feel so imbalanced in my own life? However, both are essential and both work together hand in hand. And so I want to kind of explore what that relationship between the two could look and feel like, and the connection between them both. So this is kind of like a visual visualization sort of exercise, but begin by closing the eyes if you're comfortable doing so. I want you to imagine in your mind a quiet room with a ticking clock in that room. Not something that's like soothing or hypnotic, but like a loud and abrasive one. If you can't think of one that feels at all disruptive, perhaps imagine a different sound, like your cell phone, like constantly like buzzing from a notification. See if you can close the eyes, and with the eyes closed, tap into the feeling of a room, a quiet room with a ticking clock. So it's like, now with that in your mind, imagine what it would feel like to reach out to that clock or phone and detach the battery or unplug it or shut off your phone. So when you have take a few breaths and be with that feeling. That silence, that stillness. With just like one simple action, it took a few seconds. You get silence and spaciousness. So that's the feeling of coming into balance. Unplugging the clock is sort of a metaphor for setting a boundary which allowed the movement into it. So in the above example, the boundary was established to create balance. Similarly, balance can be used as a tool to create balance. Why? Because boundaries are a form of stepping up to self-care. If your eyes are closed, you can open them. So balance are a form of stepping up to self-care and self-nurturing to meet the needs of our body and mind. They allow us to navigate challenges, to create the space to ask questions like, what will support me in this moment? When we take actions that bring our body and nervous system into a state of balance, it helps us increase our sense of agency and empowerment, and it restores the strength to establish the boundaries necessary for our own well-being and the well-being of the collective. Because if we're feeling overwhelmed, undernourished, triggered, burnt out, the ability to create boundaries will feel daunting. Finding balance will support us in how we establish our boundaries. So boundaries may require balance. Balance may require balance. Balance may require boundaries. Boundaries can enhance the state of balance. And balance can create stronger boundaries. The two are inseparable. They're interconnected and related. They feed off of each other. One final practice that I'd like for us to do together is a practice of building boundaries. So for this next practice, if you don't mind, pull out a piece of paper if you have one. And if you don't, that's okay as well. This will work fine visualizing. If you have a piece of paper, take out a piece of paper. And in the very center of that paper, draw a box. I'll show you. In the very center of a piece of paper, draw a box, just a rectangle in the center, just like this. And then I want you to draw a horizontal line above, below, to the left, and the right of each block, and write a number next to it. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, if you don't have a piece of paper, no problem. Just in your mind, hold this, visualization of a box in the center of a piece of paper. Once you have that set up, you can place the piece of paper off to the side. So we're not going to need it yet. I'm going to guide you through a few prompts. Again, with these prompts, nothing you need to write down, but we're going to go through the same prompts again in a few moments, where we will write. So begin by sitting upright in your chair. Take a couple breaths, a few breaths. Your eyes can be open or closed. Again, whatever feels most resourceful for you. Perhaps as you breathe this time, maybe breathing out ever so slightly longer than you breathe in. What does that breath feel like? What does a long exhale breath feel like? I invite you to call to mind something that is valuable to you. Something that's valuable to you. Not in the sense of money or like financial value, but something that you wouldn't give up. Something that you couldn't do without. Something that moves you towards the feeling of ease or spaciousness or of expansion. Like for me, taking my dog on a walk in the mornings. My dog for a walk in the mornings. It's like something that I not want to do without. Brings me ease, brings me spaciousness. It could be your morning coffee, it could be or chai tea, it could be some kind of morning ritual, meditation, prayer, it could be a friendship, a relationship, a community, favorite restaurant or food. Nothing comes, that's okay as well. See if you can bring into your mind something that moves you towards that feeling of ease and spaciousness, of centeredness in your life. And then briefly in your mind, reflect upon a few ways that you're able to maintain this priority in your life. Like, what do you do to make the space for it? Or what do you do when that space is infringed upon? Again, you don't need to write any of this down. We're just, for now, reflecting. For example, with walking my dog in the morning, it requires me waking up a little bit earlier, heating up some hot water, finding a good playlist to listen to. Like, these are all ways in which I can maintain and allow for that walk on a regular basis. So what do you do to make the space for that thing that you prioritize? A couple moments reflecting upon that. So sip upon some water. Now, I invite you to call to mind something which you haven't prioritized, something that you haven't made space for or you've had difficulty attaining, but something that you want in your life. something that you need or want to do to tend to your own self-care and your own well-being, and to perhaps move you towards a state of balance. So again, call to mind something you haven't prioritized yet. Something you want to make space for, something you want to bring into your life. As you hold that thing in your mind, and if nothing comes to mind, it's okay as well. We're going to do a little 3-breath practice. So with your first breath, breathe in and just feel the body alone. So together, breathe in, breathe out, feeling the body. With your second breath, this next breath, we're going to feel the breath itself. Just feeling the breath itself. Breathe in, feeling the breath in. Breathe out, feeling the breath out. And then with this third breath, calling to mind that same question, that is, what is it that I need for my own self-care? What is it that I need to prioritize for my own self-care? Taking a breath in with that question. Taking a breath out with that question. And with that in mind, open up the eyes if they're closed, pull out your piece of paper, and in the center of the box, I invite you to write down that thing, that priority, that stepping up to self-care in the center of the box. Whatever that is. And write it down. Like, just right in the center of the box. So for me, I said create more space, family, more space for family. If nothing comes to mind, you can leave the center blank. Now, next to the numbers above, below, and to either side, I want you to write sort of a word or a phrase of a boundary or a way in which you can create the space for what it is that you haven't prioritized yet in your life. In the same way in which a moment ago we reflected upon something that we have prioritized in ways in which we have. See if you can come up with 4 ways in which you can make the space for established boundaries to maintain what's written in the center of the box. I'm going to give you a few moments to write that as well. In my own example, creating more space for family, for example, one boundary is like initiating those conversations when I do have the energy to speak. And I do have the mental capacity to have deep conversation with family, that has to be there. Being in their physical presence more often be another one. But what are 4 ways in which you can support prioritizing what's written in the center of the box as a stepping up to self-care? Establishing the boundaries to make that thing possible. Couple more moments. Again, 4 might feel like a lot. 1, 2. This is also great. So with that paper in front of you, set the pen down and take a moment to look at what you wrote down. Notice how it feels when you read through these boundaries and you take them all in. Like, what do you notice in your body? What do you notice in your mind? What do you notice in your emotions? How is it all settling? How is it all settling? Coming back to how Prentice Hemphill defines boundaries as being the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Does your diagram embody this distance and space for self-love and caring for others? And it's not uncommon for it to be scary, to read these list of things, and the thought of implementing them, it's like overwhelming and overtaking. So let's take a couple breaths together collectively and allow this all to settle. Breathing in and breathing out. Again, breathing in, breathing out. And one more time, breathing in and breathing out. So before we finish our conversation today, I'd really love for us to end on a really positive note in doing a compassion practice. Because self-compassion is really, really vital to this whole process of balance and boundaries. Really all stems from that. So we're going to take 3 more breaths together. With the first breath, we'll send out well wishes and kindness to ourselves. With the second breath, we'll send out well wishes and kindness to others. With the last breath, well wishes and kindness to all beings everywhere. So sit up comfortably. Again, your eyes can be open or closed, however you're most at ease. The first breath, sending out well wishes and kindness to ourselves. Take a deep breath in. And a full breath out. Well wishes and kindness to others with a breath in, breathing in, and breathing out to all beings everywhere. And breathe in, and breathe out. Thank you so much for that. Taking the time for this conversation. I do have a couple questions that were shared, and I will go through those now. If you have any other questions, feel free to share them in the chat. So the first question, how did you get to where you are now? what inspired your path to become a yoga and meditation instructor? The first question. I mean, it's like interesting, but prior to this, I've been teaching yoga and meditation now for the past 12 years, I think. Prior to that, I was actually a chef, managed restaurants, and there was a yoga studio above one of the restaurants that I was running. And I felt my whole life, I felt that there was a way in which I could connect and help others heal through food, through cooking with love and compassion and through deeply listening. And I didn't really know at the time what that feeling was. I wasn't really able to connect with it in any deep way. After some time working underneath a yoga studio and then doing some like catering and teaching, educating, I would do some like cooking classes and education for the different yoga studio programs. I eventually went and took a yoga class. And the long story short is I ended up really falling in love with the practice, and more so than that, the philosophy behind the practice, the yoga philosophy, which in many ways was the language for what I was looking for in my connection to others through food. Really, a lot of that sort of stemmed from, I don't know, it provided words to what I could only express through my hands and through food. And so that's kind of what inspired me to kind of follow that path. And then it just, one thing led to another. But, aside from just, feeling good physically, and helping with different ailments and pains, yoga and meditation really allowed for me to connect to myself in ways in which I haven't before. Also, my mom is a therapist, so I've always had this interest in the mind, but I guess aversion towards it simultaneously. The second question is, if we're able to feel balance in peaceful moments like in nature, but feel frazzled in everyday life, how do we extend that balanced feeling to our daily lives? It's a great question, and that's practice. Like I shared earlier, there's environments that we can be in where balance is very much invited, and there's moments in which it's not, and there's moments where boundaries are invited, and there's moments where boundaries are not. And how we choose to respond to our environment and the situation is where balance lies, not in anything external, meaning that it all stems from our choices. It all stems from our actions and what we decide to do. And so if you're in a frazzled in everyday life, where can you take a step? Where can you take a pause? Is there space to step outside? Is there a way to take 3 breaths? Is there a way in which we can, for example, I mean, sounds very almost like not superficial, but like caffeine, for example, is a stimulant. If you're already feeling overstimulated, frazzled, increasing that through caffeine might not be the most supportive way of moving towards that feeling of balance. So looking at all these little ways in which our actions influence our overall state is where it begins. It could look like meditation practice. It could look like, again, taking 3 breaths. It could look like, honestly, like organizing your desk so that there's not clutter. All these little things make a difference, and they all sort of intersect and weave and translate into each other. So another question, makes sense, or might be a continuation. Now, it makes sense that when our bodies are out of balance, physical and psychological manifestations can appear. In your experience, do individuals who commit to finding balance see improvements in these manifestations? I think so, for sure. I believe so, for sure. I think that anything that we do matters. Our intentional actions really make a difference. It's not to say that it'll happen overnight, but I think that any decisions that we make and the choices that we decide to have an influence. And balance, like I said, it's not a static state. So we're always moving kind of in and out of it and around it. It's like a dance, but it's how we do that dance. You know, what's our next step? How can we be more proactive? How can we be less reactive? All of these things, I think, matter. What should I do when others don't respect the boundaries I set for myself? This is the complexity of it. And this question comes up every time. I don't have an answer, because if it's like a boundary with a friend that you can separate yourself from that individual, you know, separate yourself from that individual. If it's a colleague or that you can't, then it makes it very complicated. If it's a family member that you need in your life, like, so there's so much complexity. I think the start is communication, you know, communicating like, listen, I'm trying to set said boundary. This is so that I can love you and me simultaneously. It's hard. I imagine it's difficult for someone to respond adversely to that expression of love, you know, that this boundary is an expression of love. So again, it's complex. It's complicated. I don't necessarily have an answer, but communication is one way. So any last questions? Thank you so very much. It was really wonderful to share this space with all of you. I hope to see you again at some point in time, and I will pass the mic to Denia.
Hello, everyone.
Denia, sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries, Denia. Yeah. But hello, everyone. We hope that you found this last hour with Josh from Peace on Purpose to be both helpful and empowering. As activists, we must be especially mindful of the ways in which our work can impact our well-being over time. My name is Denia, and I am from New Jersey, from the United States. At Girl Up, I serve as a teen advisor as a member of the class of 2021 to 2022. Before we begin our conversation today, I'd like to take some time for each of my fellow Girl Up leaders to introduce themselves. We can begin with Vanshika, if you can, yeah.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Vanshika. I am the regional leader for Girl Up Europe and Central Asia. Currently, I'm in the Netherlands pursuing my master's in gender and human rights. And I'll start off asking my first question to Juliet. As Girl Up leader, we all have taken on the challenge of incorporating advocacy and organizing in our daily lives, all while being busy with our studies, work towards multiple goals. So, Juliet, to protect your well being, what proactive steps or intentional practice do you use to help manage your time while also preventing burnout? Maybe using a planner, scheduling breaks, or exercises.
Okay, thank you so much, Vanshika. I'm Juliet Nyakwadansi. I'm the regional leader for Girl Up in Ghana, and I'm so excited to be part of this today. So most of the self-care activities I take, being a Girl Up regional leader, doing advocacy, and then taking up a full-time job and taking up some courses too can be very overwhelming. So what I do is planning ahead. And so before I begin the day or I begin the week, what I do is to plan what am I supposed to do this week and then prioritize. So I also journal a lot. I plan, and then whatever comes out of my activities or however that I feel, whether I feel overwhelmed or I feel I should do something else, whatever feelings that comes, I feel down, I feel so excited, happy, I just journal it and then I just get over it. So I would send my next question to Priyanka. What activities do you also do to prevent all these burnout? Because I understand that as a youth activist, our work can be very overwhelming, and then burnout are also expected. So what self-care activities do you also take?
Thank you for your question, Juliet. I think things do get overwhelming sometimes, and it is okay to feel a burnout, both physically and mentally. But what's more important is that how you navigate through it. I will share a secret with you all that personally helped me to deal with the burnouts. It is a 3-step mantra which says that first, express the gratitude. then reflect back, and finally manifest. I thank God for everything. I have a healthy and sound body, a good family, and my existence in general. Then I reflect on how far I have come, what all I have achieved, and how I've sailed through all the challenges that life has thrown on me. And finally, I manifest. Manifest where I want to be, my goals, my dreams, my aspirations. And the procedure does give me the required energy boost and also makes me feel like me again. But also, sometimes we all can engage in certain self care activities that we like. For example, for me, it is a detailed step skincare routine, exercising, and spending quality time with my family. It all helps me to be happy and have the required energy boost and feel like myself again. Now, I would also like to ask a question, and my question would be to Kaitlyn. Kaitlyn, you are an activist and advocate for so many different humanitarian causes. It is no secret that activism and advocacy work can be taxing on a mental health because of the inherent emotion and passion that goes into it. This is why we must take care of ourselves first so that we can take care of the world. Can you think of a situation where your advocacy work pushed you to pause and take care of yourself first? How did you respond to it?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Priyanka. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlyn. I'm a Girl Up Teen Advisor from the 2021-2022 class, and I am also a Girl Up US Midwest Regional Leader. So to answer your question, I would say a time when I took a pause would be at the end of the 2020-2021 school year. And for all of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, I have been deeply involved in AAPI advocacy work, specifically around anti-Asian hate incidents that were on a rise at the time due to COVID-19 and like xenophobic and xenophobic sentiments around Asian people in America. So specifically, I feel like when you work with advocacy such as hate incidents or that involve hate or like violent incidents, especially when it is affecting your personal community, that tends to be very draining. And I feel like as activists, we tend to always like want to like move things forward in a way that sometimes like it can like continuously drain us until like we don't realize it until like months or even like a year or so later, like how draining this has been on our own mental health, especially with the amount of like empathy and emotion that's required to be involved in these advocacy spaces and to be listening to these stories and to be able to use these stories to encourage further action. So I would say at the end of 2020 to 2021, I did have the opportunity. I worked with one of my school's administrators to set up a few conversations in like an Asian American affinity group. And although I was involved with some of like the back end work with like deciding like how it would be advertised and how to get people to attend and like helping people show up and show out and know that it was actually happening, I was able to participate in that conversation as a participant. And I feel like as activists, we can often feel like we need to be in these administrative roles or these leadership roles, but often we can really just step back and take a moment to participate. And I feel like having these conversations with other Asian Americans, especially who were in my location and who were local with me and who I knew really well, helped me feel more comfortable and provided me with a space to where I could express my own emotions around the situation, which I think is really important because especially when you're working in advocacy in a place, sometimes like the way that you personally feel can get pushed aside a little bit in favor of really trying to amplify everyone else's around you stories. And I think it's important to also take some time for yourself and be able to express your own opinions, especially if the situation is something that is personally affecting you as well. And I think another thing that I did want to mention in this is, I would say at the beginning of the 2021-2022 school year, I'm currently a high school senior, so I had to deal with a lot of college application stuff, and I was taking a lot of AP classes. Things were pretty difficult for me, and I would say that at the time, just because of the stress of everything, and going back to school after COVID-19 in person for the first time in many months, it was pretty draining on me, and I would say like my mental health wasn't really in the best situation. I probably had the lowest self-esteem that I had ever in my life. And it was something where I didn't really understand or know how to take care of my mental health in that situation. And I kind of just had to wait it out until the situation itself resolved and got better. And some of the stressors that I had, like college applications, just eventually were finished and completed. And I do want to just share that experience a little bit because I think it's important to know that there's not like one specific magic solution to mental health or to difficulties that you're having in your life. And the best thing that you can do is just reach out to your networks, and there are always people that are there to support you. Specifically in advocacy, you can reach out to your friends and your family, but your advocacy networks should also in a way feel like your family and feel like people who are there for you. I know on the Girl Up Teen Advisory Board, there were a lot of Girl Up Teen advisors that I talked to or had conversations with during our meetings about like our shared struggles during like senior year especially, and just at other points in our life and the different struggles we were going through. And it was really great to hear that you weren't alone, and these people that maybe you've even just connected with only through online can really be there to support you and help you move through things. But ultimately, it's really like within yourself and how like proactive you are and like reaching out to people. And like you can do some of the steps that were mentioned earlier to prevent burnout and to have practices that help you manage your time. But also as well, I would say just learn to prioritize yourself first in everything that you're doing, and learn to make sacrifices that sometimes will like help yourself first and help you have like help support your mental health in general, so that you can be able to help other people around you. Because in advocacy, if you aren't able to help yourself and be the best person that you can be, then it's going to be difficult for you to advocate for other people. So I would say that that's something that I would really prioritize in responding to any mental health or mindfulness or draining activism struggles that you're having at the time. So that's my answer to your question. I have a question to Denia. Denia, you shared that your goal in the future is to become a civil rights attorney. Like your peers here today, this likely requires long-term involvement with advocacy and activism. This is a really inspiring goal, which most certainly requires some resilience as you move along in your journey. What does resilience mean to you in the context of mental health? And how do you plan on maintaining resiliency throughout your life?
Of course, thank you so much for that question. And honestly, applause to all the speakers here today. You guys are absolutely killing the game. And I really want to start just with the topic of resiliency. I think on a personal note, this is a very hard time for people to be resilient. With not only finals, but also everything going on in the world, this has been a very daunting time for a lot of people, and especially youth advocates like all of us here today on this call who are on the front lines doing the hard work, from our reproductive freedoms being in jeopardy to gun violence and to our human rights just being in peril. Could be a time in which having resiliency can be very hard. And so for me, when I think about resiliency in the context of my mental health, I think about hope. And before you look at me like hope, that sounds cliche, the way that I see hope is knowing that hope isn't always a kumbaya type of statement. Hope is something that has to be rebuilt and something that has to be strengthened again and again and again. And at times it could be hard to have hope in the future and have hope that things will improve. And so for me, when I think about resiliency and when I think about hope, I acknowledge that it's okay at times to feel hopeless. It's okay to feel sad, to be anxious, or to be depressed, because those are human emotions and those things shouldn't be stigmatized. We shouldn't feel bad at ourselves or feel wrong at ourselves for feeling the way that we feel about life. But what allows us to foster resilience within those emotions is knowing that even though we are down, we're not staying down. We can fall 1,000 times, so we're always going to get up and be stronger. And when we get up and when we fall and when we get up from the pit, we're going to come back on top 10 times higher than we were before. And so for me, I know that in moments in which I might feel hopeless or when resiliency might not even feel possible, I know that I have to practice three main things that kind of help me to really get back on top. And one of the first one is patience, being patient with myself and allowing myself to have as much grace as I show towards other people. I really try to just be patient and understand that I'm a human being and I'm processing things as I go, whether that's the stressors of advocacy or burnout or with school or academics. I always just try to demonstrate the patience that I do to others. And another thing that I do within that is also just practice and practicing mental health practices that allow me to have that patience, whether that's journaling or just sitting down for 5 minutes in silence and just meditating with myself. I always try to find ways to remain centered in everything that I do. And last but certainly not least is empathy, connecting back to that portion on grace and being empathetic towards ourselves and caring towards ourselves. I think when we think about self-care and mental health in the context of today, we commonly think of going to the spa or getting our hair done, and all those things are nice. But sometimes the most important thing that we can do as these advocates to better our mental well-being is really to just sit down with ourselves and to listen to ourselves. And circling back to the overarching question, it's through really sitting down, acknowledging where I am and acknowledging where I want to be, that I'm able to foster the resilience that I need to persevere in this work. And another thing that I will add is that resiliency a lot of the times comes from knowing that everything that I do has a purpose that's greater than me. When I'm advocating for change or when I'm speaking on panels, even here today, I know that I'm not only sharing my voice, I'm sharing the voices of my peers, my sisters, and those that are coming before me. And so when I do things like this and when I encounter challenges, I know that I have to persevere and I have to maintain that resiliency, not only for me, but for all those that are connected to me. And so those are the ways that I hope I'm maintaining that resiliency throughout my life. And for those of you out there who are having a hard time right now, just given everything in the world, I just want to affirm the fact that we see you and we hear you, and we are all here with you today to provide support and uplift you as you continue to be the phenomenal change maker that you are. And now, of course, I have a question for Vanshika. I'd love to hear about your experiences with mindfulness. While mindfulness doesn't eliminate stress or trauma, it does help us to respond better in stressful situations. What is your favorite mindfulness technique, and how does it help you show up in your work as an activist?
Thank you. And mindfulness is something I've struggled all my life because I have a mind which is very talkative and which tends to think a lot. So for me, being at peace with myself has been a struggle. That's why when I got this part, I was just laughing that how uncanny this is because I have been struggling with it for a major part of my life. So actually, it all started very simple. Like it was also mentioned earlier that my like for me, sleeping used to be an issue. I could not sleep because of the thoughts or the anxiety or whatever negativity which used to go around me. So I think I started taking things slow, like started taking a break, taking a pause, and not just rushing behind or getting into a rat race with myself. So for me, I think it was very important to take out that me time in which I am just with myself and and make sure that I do it because for me to show up, I need to be in a good spirit or else there's no point of me showing up. So I feel for me my evenings are very important, especially the sunset. That's when it's me time with my tea and this beautiful evening. And because I'm near the sea, so I tend to go for a walk with my dog. And uh, I my poor dog gets like all muddy, and then that's a different battle altogether to come and clean him. But that's a very beautiful time which I have with my dog. And I started to listen to meditation, sleep meditations before going to bed. And being very honest, it doesn't work all the time because my thinking is so loud that some nights I am calm, but some nights I'm not so calm. So I think it's a struggle, but I feel I am in a better position than I was 2 years back. But it's a constant effort to be actually in peace with yourself. The other thing which I really appreciate, which we spoke about, was boundaries today because I feel sometimes in some relations of mine, we haven't respected that boundary, and that ended up being very difficult on me. And when that relation didn't work out, I did feel a sight of relief. You know, you feel light, and then you realize that, oh my God, how much was this relationship, whatever friendship, taking out of me? So I feel if I would have practiced boundary earlier and it wouldn't have reached to this stage, then it would have been better. But again, we all are work in progress. and we are learning. So a few things which I am learning and I'm taking back is I have to take out time for myself on a very daily basis, on a very regular basis. And another thing which I do and which has really improved me as a person is what I speak to myself. Because I know I think I choose my words very wisely when I speak to another person, but I am not that wise and I'm not that kind in my words when I talk to myself. I think I get very harsh and I get very critical. But then I realize that if I am being so difficult on me, how can I who else will be nice to me? I have the longest relationship with myself and I have to make it a good and a healthy one. And instead of badgering myself about any small thing or not so small thing, I need to comfort myself, because if I don't, then who will? And what I speak to me is going to really consciously or subconsciously impact me as a person, my confidence as a person. So these are a couple of things which I have started to do and I have been doing, and I feel it has, of course, definitely worked. But there are days when I give in to overthinking, when I give in to the loud noise in me. But then again, it's all about practice, I feel. So yes, thank you.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Such an interesting and educating session. I've personally learned a lot about being patient with myself and also with the mindfulness, just accepting that there are days that your mind wouldn't be at rest, or there are days that you wouldn't have it totally okay when it comes to your mental health, but you need to be intentional about yourself and then feed yourself with positivity so that others can also be positive towards you. So these are some of the key things that I've really learned about today, and I hope you took something from our amazing speakers too. So thank you so much, Denia, Priyanka, Kaitlyn, and Vanshika for sharing your insightful thoughts in this discussion. As I said, I've personally learned a lot, and I know that others have also learned a lot. So I'm sure they can all agree that open and honest conversations about mindfulness and self-care and mental health, which is something that we rarely find people having honest conversations about, as young people, especially young activists and advocates in Gallup and then across the globe, are incredibly important and motivating as we all continue to fight social change and equality in our world. And I'm very excited to incorporate some of the tips suggested here today into my everyday life. As I mentioned, I've learned to be patient with myself and to also feed myself with positivity. And I want to thank our audience so much for joining us today for this conversation. And then we hope that you thoroughly enjoyed this and learned a lot from this month's Global Girl Up Fitness Challenge. Thank you all so much for joining.
Yeah, to reiterate some of Juliet's statements, thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to my fellow speakers who I've learned so much from. And I think my main takeaway from this conversation as well is just learning to be patient with myself. And I really loved what Vanshika said about how your relationship with yourself is the longest relationship that you'll have. So it's something that you really need to learn to take care of. And lastly, we would like to remind everyone who joined us here today to consider donating to help fund Girl Up's global leadership development programming so that Girl Up can reach more girls globally and continue the fight for gender equality. If you're interested, click on the link in our chat that will be posted right now to see our fundraising page on the platform Classy. Take care, everyone. Bye. Thank you so much.